The day Caleb Merritt handed his wife divorce papers was the same day he handed her back everything she had quietly built for him over 9 years. He did not know that yet, but she did. Serena Merritt, 37, had been the kind of woman people described as steady. Not exciting, not flashy, steady. The kind of steady that holds a household together while a man mistakes it for the furniture. She had grown up in Raleigh, the daughter of a retired accountant and a woman who ran a small catering business out of their garage. She understood numbers before she understood people. She had her master's in finance by 24, her first investment portfolio by 26, and a husband by 29 who told her she was the most grounded person he had ever met. She thought that was a compliment. For a while she believed it was. Caleb Merritt, 41, came from a family that built things. His grandfather had started Merritt Civil, a mid-sized construction and land development company based in Charlotte, North Carolina. By the time Caleb inherited a seat on the board at 33, the company had contracts across 3 states, a reputation for reliable residential builds, and a debt-to-asset ratio that nobody at the family table wanted to talk about out loud. Caleb was not the numbers man. He was the face man. Handsome in the way that photographs well, convincing in the way that conference rooms respond to, and confident in the way that hides, for a very long time, the fact that he had never actually learned to read a balance sheet. Serena had seen the cracks in Merritt Civil's finances within the first year of their marriage. She did not say anything then. She was still learning how that family worked. How his mother, Patricia Merritt, 68, sat at Sunday dinners and made observations that sounded like compliments but landed like corrections. How his older brother, Garrett, 44, who technically outranked Caleb on the board, deferred to their mother in everything. How Caleb came home from family meetings wound tight and spent the rest of the evening looking at his phone instead of her. She stayed quiet and she paid attention. That was the thing about Serena that the people in that family never understood. They saw a quiet woman and assumed she was empty. They looked at her composure and called it passivity. Caleb used to say, early in their marriage, that she was the calm at the center of everything. Later, she would think about how quickly the same quality that once made her magnetic became the reason he forgot she was in the room. She found out about Diane Holloway the same way most wives find out. Not through confrontation, not through confession, but through a text message sent to the wrong number on a Tuesday evening while she was making dinner and Caleb had left his phone on the kitchen counter. Running 10 minutes late, already thinking about you. Serena read it once, turned the stove off, washed her hands. Then she set the phone face down exactly where she had found it. She did not cry that night. She lay next to him in the dark and she thought about numbers. She thought about what she had built, what was in her name and what was not. She had always been careful about that, not out of distrust, she told herself back then, but out of habit, out of the way her father had raised her to never let your financial identity dissolve into someone else's. Diane Holloway, 34, was a project coordinator at Merritt Civil's Charlotte office. She had been hired 18 months earlier on a recommendation from Garrett, who claimed she came with excellent references and an eye for logistics. Patricia had met her at the company's summer event and reportedly told Garrett afterward that she was the right kind of energy for this company. What that meant, Serena had not asked. She had attended that event, stood beside her husband in a blue dress, and made conversation with subcontractors and their wives, and driven home with Caleb, who had spent most of the ride talking about a new project in Asheville. Now she knew what she was looking at when she looked back at that evening. She spent the next 3 weeks watching. Not obsessively, methodically. She was a woman who had spent her career reading patterns in financial data, and the pattern here was not difficult to find once she knew where to look. Late evenings framed as project deadlines. A weekend trip to Raleigh to see a client that no client had ever confirmed. The way his phone now traveled with him from room to room like a second spine. She did not confront him. She had a reason for that, and it was not fear. By the time Serena discovered the affair, she had already been managing something that Caleb did not know about. 18 months earlier, coincidentally around the time Diane Holloway joined the company, Serena had begun a quiet process that had nothing to do with her marriage and everything to do with what she saw coming at Merritt Civil. The company had taken on 2 major development contracts in the Piedmont corridor, both of which were significantly undercapitalized for their scope. She had run the numbers herself, informally, on a Sunday afternoon when Caleb left a folder of projections on the kitchen table and didn't notice her reading them while he watched football. The numbers were not good. She had not said anything to Caleb. She had said something instead to her own financial advisor, a woman named Renata Osi, who had managed Serena's personal portfolio since before the marriage. Together, they had set up a holding structure, clean, legal, entirely separate from anything tied to the Merit name. A private entity called Crestline Capital Partners, funded through Serena's own accumulated investments, her inheritance from her father, who had died 2 years into the marriage, and a series of quiet moves that had taken patience and care, and the kind of deliberate privacy that comes naturally to a woman who had learned to be invisible in her own home. Crestline was not built as a weapon that needed to be understood. It was built as a hedge. She had watched Merit Civil accumulate debt for years, and she had known. The way you know a storm is coming, not because you see the clouds, but because you feel the pressure change, that the reckoning would arrive. She had simply made sure she would not be caught in the collapse without a floor under her. What she had not planned for was what happened on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Caleb came home early. He was wearing a jacket she didn't recognize and carrying the specific kind of stillness that belongs to someone who has made a decision and rehearsed it. He asked her to sit down. She sat. He stood near the window, and he talked for about 4 minutes. Not long, the way these things go, and what he said was that he had been unhappy for some time, that he felt they had grown apart, that he had a great deal of respect for her, but that he no longer believed they were right for each other. He set a folder on the coffee table. Inside was a draft divorce agreement prepared by a family attorney that offered her a settlement that was technically fair and strategically insufficient. It accounted for the house, her car, a modest sum for what it described as her contributions to the household. It did not account for 9 years of watching, managing, absorbing, planning. It did not account for what she had protected while he was busy not noticing her. Patricia Merritt arrived 20 minutes later. This was something Serena had not been told would happen, but she was not surprised. Patricia walked in through the front door. She had always used her own key and took a seat on the far end of the couch with the practiced ease of a woman who considered this her living room too. She was wearing cream and pearls. She looked at Serena the way she always had, with a kind of polite attention that didn't quite reach curiosity. Garrett came in behind her. Nobody offered Serena tea. Nobody asked if she was all right. Caleb said that the family had agreed it would be better if the transition was handled cleanly and quickly. He said Diane's name for the first time. Not as a confession, but as information delivered flatly, as though Serena might have needed the clarity. Patricia said nothing. Garrett looked at his phone, and Serena sat in the living room of the house she had designed the kitchen renovation for, in front of the fireplace she had chosen the stone for, and she looked at the folder on the table, and she felt something settle inside her like a key turning in a lock. She picked up the folder. She looked at the numbers, then she set it back down. "I'll have my attorney review this," she said. Patricia's expression shifted slightly. Not quite disappointment, more like mild revision. She had expected Serena understood a different reaction. Tears, maybe? Or anger. Something to confirm what that family had always believed about her, that she was composed until she wasn't, and that underneath the composure was someone who could be managed. Serena thanked them for coming. She held the door open. When they were gone, she called Renata. What happened to Merit Civil over the following 4 months was not sudden. It had the quality of something that had been building for a long time and was simply now becoming visible to the people who had chosen not to see it. The Piedmont contracts stalled. A subcontractor filed a dispute that froze capital on one of the Asheville projects. A refinancing arrangement that Caleb had been counting on fell through when the lending institution completed its audit and didn't like what they found. By June, the company was in a position that Garrett described to the board as a temporary liquidity challenge, and that Serena, watching from outside, would have described as a controlled slide toward insolvency. The board began receiving acquisition inquiries. Most were low offers from opportunistic buyers who had read the situation correctly and were pricing accordingly. One was different. It came through a financial intermediary, was structured with unusual consideration for the company's existing workforce, and included terms that indicated the buyer understood Merit Civil's actual asset value rather than its current crisis price. It was the only inquiry that offered enough to cover the company's debt and leave something for the shareholders. The board voted to pursue it. The intermediary requested a formal meeting. A conference room was booked at the Merit Civil offices for a Thursday morning in early August. Caleb wore a new tie. Garrett prepared talking points. Patricia, who had no formal board position but had never let that stop her, positioned herself in a chair along the wall of the conference room. The representatives from Crestline Capital Partners arrived at 9 o'clock. They were led by Renata Osi, 52, who had the kind of calm that comes not from training, but from having sat in a great many rooms where people underestimated her. She was followed by 2 analysts and a legal advisor. She set her portfolio on the table, introduced her team in 2 sentences, and then she said that the principal of Crestline Capital Partners would be joining them shortly. Serena walked in at 9:04. She was wearing dark grey. Her hair was up. She carried nothing but a single leather portfolio that she set on the table without sound. She looked at the room, at the faces registering the information, recalibrating, failing to find the right expression, and she sat down at the head of the table. Patricia went very still. Garrett's talking points were still in his hand. Caleb, who was seated directly across from her, did not speak for a long moment. When he did, it was not a sentence exactly. It was the beginning of one. He said her name, and then he stopped. Serena opened her portfolio. She did not look at him when she said it. She said it to the room evenly in the way she said everything, clearly without decoration. The trust structure predates the marriage by 7 years. Crestline has no legal connection to any Merritt family asset. This acquisition is entirely clean. She let that settle. Then she looked at Caleb. He asked quietly whether she had known, whether this was something she had planned from the beginning, a slow construction of something designed specifically to arrive at this moment. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "I plan to protect myself," she said. "What you did with the company after that was your decision." Patricia made a sound that was not quite a word. Garrett set his talking points down. The acquisition closed 62 days later. Merritt Civil's debt was absorbed, its workforce retained, its contracts reorganized under new management. The Merritt family name was removed from the signage on a Tuesday in October. Caleb received his shareholder distribution. Modest, honest, exactly what the math said he was owed, and signed the paperwork without ceremony. The divorce was finalized the same month. Serena's attorney had countered the original settlement offer with a document that was, by any measure, thorough. 9 years of financial records, documented contributions to joint decisions, an appraisal of the kitchen renovation she had overseen and paid for personally. The number on the final agreement was not the number on the folder Caleb had set on the coffee table in March. He signed that too. People who knew Serena from before the marriage and who had watched the years in between with the quiet attention of people who liked to believe they saw things clearly would later say that they were not surprised. They would say she had always been like that. Careful, deliberate, playing a longer game than the one visible on the surface. They would say it as though it were obvious, which is the way people tend to speak about things they understood only after they were over. Diane Holloway left Merritt Civil before the acquisition closed. She had submitted her resignation in July, citing a personal opportunity. Caleb's living arrangement after the divorce was an apartment near the University District, which was a different kind of neighborhood than the one he had grown up expecting to inhabit. He was seen by people who reported back through the ordinary channels of a city where everyone knows someone to be managing. That was the word they used, managing. Patricia Merritt gave no public comment on any of it. She had spent 40 years building a family into a name and a name into a reputation, and what she was left with now was the reputation, undamaged, and the name belonging to a company that no longer bore it. She attended church on Sundays. She called Garrett on Tuesdays. She did not, as far as anyone observed, call Caleb very often. Serena moved into a house in a quiet part of South Charlotte that she had found and purchased entirely on her own. It had a garden in the back that needed work and a kitchen that was already exactly right. She kept the same financial advisor. She kept the same last name for the time being because she had earned it the way you earn anything, by paying for it in full and keeping the receipt. Renata asked her once, over coffee, a few weeks after the acquisition, whether it had felt like what she thought it would feel like. Serena thought about that for a moment. "I didn't think about how it would feel," she said. "I thought about whether it was right." Renata waited. "It was right," Serena said. She picked up her cup. Outside, it was an ordinary Thursday in Charlotte, which meant it was warm and a little humid, and the sky was doing what it always did in September, that particular shade of blue that appears briefly between summer and fall and does not last long enough. A woman walked past the window with a stroller. A delivery truck idled at the corner. A man on the other side of the glass was reading something on his phone and not looking up. The world was doing what it always does. It was going on. And somewhere in the accounts managed by Crestline Capital Partners, in the careful, unhurried architecture of decisions made by a woman, understood that patience was not the same as passivity. The numbers were exactly where she had put them.